There's kind of a continuation a little bit of last week of the characters document and the numbers that were found there. As was pointed out, there's calendrical markers that are around the dates, the date numbers, which I recognized actually when I looked at them. I was kind of puzzled initially. I said, what are those actually? But then a couple of them I recognized as actually being part of it came to pass Maya glyphs, which they use to designate their calendar counts. So this is kind of just a discussion of those calendrical markers. So it's not a discussion of like the full Nephite calendar. It's just the markers that are found, and then their Mesoamerican equivalents. Also, when looking at this Reformed Egyptian, one needs to remember that when these were engraved on the plates by Mormon and Moroni, the language had been embedded in Mesoamerica for approximately 1,000 years. So that's a long period of time for any language to sit somewhere without some modifications. In case of the calendrical markers and structures found in the characters document, unlike the numbers, which actually had pretty straightforward forms from hieratic, the glyph forms, because the Hebrew and Egyptian construction did not actually use, wasn't originally accommodating of the Mesoamerican structure, the hieratic and demonic glyphs that are kind of used to derive these characters document calendrical markers, they do originate in the Egyptian, but the Egyptian didn't really have an equivalent. So you'll see that they're modified or stylized somewhat to basically accommodate this calendar system that didn't exist in Egypt, but they still utilize the Egyptian to as a descriptor or as designation of the calendrical system. So that's kind of why I'm saying we're not necessarily expecting in these particular glyphs to have just a complete straightforward match to meaning, although I can show there is some. Unlike the names and the rest of the text that's in the characters document, you can pretty well show the meaning right to our hieratic glyph. So this is the characters document. Last time I talked about the blue, everywhere there's a blue, that is a number. The other things that I'm showing here, and we'll talk about them, is the red is a calendar, is initial series, and we'll talk about how the Maya, particularly in Mesoamerica in general, but mostly the Maya is what we know the most about, is they have glyphs that are associated with the calendar dates, and those are what we're calling markers. So the red is a calendrical series introductory glyph. In the characters document, the Nephite actually tells you which calendar you're on. The purple designates, it's a distance number, and I talked about last time the way that the Maya do it. You have select a date, and you can go forward or backward off of the date. We'll talk about that in a minute. And so you have a posterior, which counts in a certain direction, and anterior counts in the other direction. The other thing they have is they have period ending or transition glyphs going from one era to another era. We also see those here in the characters document, and talk about those as well. So here, like the green, we have the posterior, and as you can see, these are all pretty close to identical. The reds are different because the calendar actually that it's referring to are different. Some are the same if they're referring to the same calendar. And then the purple, these are the distance number, and you can see there's kind of these H forms here. The little, what I call curly six glyph that accommodates actually does shift positions, and I don't have that in the analysis tonight, but that does actually reflect the calendar that they're sitting in. I kind of have an analysis of that. So all these little purple ones. And then, as I mentioned, the green is the posterior, the orange, which is like these two little crescents, those are the anterior date indicators. And the pink, we'll talk about, those are the period ending or transition glyphs. So they involve more than just that glyph. It's because it actually identifies the calendar that is transitioning to. There's not a ton, there's just a few of those. With that, we'll just head to the next slide. This is the kind of a description of the Mesoamerican calendrical markers. Now, Mesoamerica, they use the long count, which is basically a day count. They count every day, starting from a point back in 3,114, which Paul asked me about last time. Why do we think that's where it starts? I said, well, it kind of corresponds with first dynasty in Egyptian in Egypt, but I that's subject for debate. But in these long counts, they do have a series of these types of calendrical markers. I talked about an initial series introductory glyph. So they have initial series glyphs, just like I'm going to show you. However, they do kind of have a basic one they use just for all their calendar counts, because they're really only counting them long count calendar. They also include other calendrical elements, but they kind of smush them all into one calendar. Characters document, you actually have different calendars, just like the Book of Mormon has different calendars. So the Book of Mormon has the Reign of the Kings calendar, Reign of Judges calendar, what I call the Coming of Christ calendar, which they initiated 9 years retroactively after Christ was born. There's a supplementary series that the Characters document does not have in the Maya, so we're not really going to talk about it. As I mentioned, these distance numbers are the intervals between dates in the Maya inscriptions. And the posterior and anterior date indicators, which the distance number is either followed by or surrounded or is at some position related to the anterior or posterior date indicators. Kind of, as I mentioned, it would be something like a simplistic example of their counting would be Ronald Reagan was president in 1982. Then it came to pass after 4 years, he was reelected. So, so the initial series date would be 1982. Maya would then have a DNIG, this distance number indicator. We don't obviously have it in our sentence. And then it came to pass would be this PDI glyph. And then you would have the 4 years. So it's basically saying you count forward from that 1982 date 4 years. And both the PDI glyph and the anterior and the ADI, the anterior date indicator glyph, by the Mayan scholars, they have translated those as it came to pass, or since, or otherwise. In my translation of the Characters document, I didn't list it came to pass, and I just put since, because I was not trying to recreate the Book of Mormon language exactly. It was just trying to get meaning. And so I mean, I used it in a couple places, but it would be much longer if I had done all the it came to pass. So, okay. Hope this isn't too confusing. So now we'll talk about this initial series introductory glyphs. And these are the ones that are in front of the date, which tell you which calendar you're in the Characters document, in the Nephi calendar. They had, like I mentioned, they have these in the Epo-Olmec and Maya systems, but they don't have multiple ones. They just have kind of one form or format. They do stylistically change, but the Characters document actually, you'll see that these introductory glyphs also incorporate numeric elements of the sacred numbers, which I talked about, that the text itself, the numbers itself, do kind of contemplate or incorporate. It's a very religious text. So the first one that's in the Characters document is the Lehi departure calendar. So we have the 600-year count that started, it goes beyond 600 years after Christ, but it was initially just intended to be 600 years because it matches the prophetic prophecy found in the Book of Mormon that 600 years after Lehi's departure from the land of Jerusalem, then Christ would be born. And It has basically these three little bars, and then you actually have a 2 associated with it. Now, I actually think that maybe this is associated with the death date of King Benjamin. The Mesoamericans did incorporate month glyphs into their calendar markers. So I think this may be at maybe 2, but it's also doing something 2, meaning it's 2 months, adding 2 months to whenever King Benjamin's death date is telling us which month he died within that date. But if you look at it, again, I don't have everything here because I was trying to cut down the presentation. Basically, you have 2 times, and these little circular glyphs represent 100 in the Egyptian. So you kind of, and you have these lotuses would form, they would kind of have them combined at the bottom. So you kind of have a stylized tree, if you want to call it that, which may actually, be representative of kind of the tree of life reminder. They also represent 200. So you have 3 bars, which can also be 1s multiplied by 200s, and you get 600. So this is just talking about that glyph that shows the 2 months. It's on the Gezer calendar from 925 BC in Palestine. So that's kind of where this number 2 comes from. Let's see. So this is a Mesoamerican, what you call ISIG, meaning their introductory glyph. It has some similarities. This is actually the Epa Olmec, where we think actually probably more correlates with Nephite areas, at least later, because it's kind of up in what you call the land northward, further to the land northward. But it does seem to also incorporate kind of some of this Egyptian structure. And that Olmec really has not been translated. There's not too many examples. But so then the next one we have is the Reign of Kings introductory glyph. This is found in front of the date that corresponds with the Reign of Kings. If you might recall, this was a 50 in the number system. That's a 5. A bar can be a 5, elevated 5. So again, you're looking at a 55 here, which kind of actually corresponds with what the Book of Mormon says on the 55 years that passed away when, that's when Nephi made the record. That's when he was the first king. So it kind of correlates with the Reign of Kings, from an American. The next one is the Reign of Judges introductory glyph. And again, these are stylized. They're not matching the number exactly, but they're a form of the number that I previously talked about. So this is a stylized number 7, which is kind of interesting. I'll talk about the 7 tribes. I just cut and pasted here. But the number 7, it looks to be indicative that there actually were 7 tribes. So there probably were 7 judges. The Book of Mormon doesn't say how many judges, just said there was, the chief judge and other judges, but it would make sense. You have 7 different tribes. So it'd be a stylized number 7 for the Reign of the Judges. That was implemented, at the end of the Reign of the Kings. So it's kind of the next one in line. Then there's the Coming of Christ introductory glyph. This one corresponds with, like I mentioned, birth date of Christ, and then runs till the end of the Book of Mormon. The glyph form means can mean million, many, countless, multitude. Can also derive as infinity or eternity. It also correlates with the Egyptian glyphs for jubilation. And I don't really haven't published this book yet, but what I'm in the new book, I'm kind of showing that there is a Jubilee calendar that is embedded in the Book of Mormon. You can see it when anytime there's a Trump mention, that's a Jubilee year. It's also in the characters document lists Jubilee glyphs on a couple of those instances. So I do think that you're looking at kind of it's also doubling as a Jubilee concept for basically the birth of Christ as the time of Jubilee. And you can see it's a stylized form of one of meaning it's not exact, but there may be some elements I'm not seeing there. I mean, you only had so much text. Some of the elements of the glyph may represent other things in Reformed Egyptian. So let me get to the distance number introductory glyphs, which tells you there's a distance number associated with it. As I pointed out, there are kind of these H type glyphs that are in the characters document. Now, in Maya and also in Egyptian, these glyph forms could flip and be reverse, depending on if you were reading from right to left or left to right. So you kind of have to look at, there may be both, it may actually match a mirror glyph form. And like I said, there is some variation even in the Maya as to the way these things work or count. So it's not like a standardized uniform system throughout the Maya. They have them all, but sometimes they'll use the ADI or PDI in a little different ways. So as I noticed, as you can see, the stylized H form is found in the Maya. These are all the Maya distance number glyphs. As you can see, they are very artistic and somewhat abstract in their glyph form, meaning depending on where they're at, they may write glyphs in a stylized way, in an artistic way. So it's not essentially standardized, but as you can see, it's an in glyph, maybe an infix glyph within the actual distance number, Maya distance number glyph. So the glyph has more than what is in the characters document. You can see that form, and even like the little curly six is what I call it at times, is found in it, just like is in the characters document, kind of H form. Again, these are, and so the phonetic is sac. My pronunciation is probably very poor. So for that distance number, that's the actual way they say it. And then for that form of the distance number, which is a portion of it, is tau. So now we'll talk about the definition really of that particular distance number glyph, minus or translated as succession, exchange, change, or to follow. That little curly six glyph indicates succession, or it's just uses an ordinalizer, meaning it kind of adds a numeric value to whatever it's attached to. And pronunciation of the DNA is sac or psychogeny. Just don't quote me on that. And is also defined by other Montgomery as put in order and was counted or increased. So in the characters document, the Egyptian from which it's derived is similar to the definition of increase found in the Maya. It comes from the Egyptian word for ki, I guess, under the fudge. There's a couple different phonetics systems, but it means another and also. So they match these are the hieratic forms. So you have like kind of the little curly six and the little H form that make up that word. This is actually the demotic, which is actually a very close match to the characters document glyph. So again, it's another. So it actually matches the Maya definition pretty close to what they've given to the definition of that Maya glyph as to what the characters document glyph is found, definition found in the Egyptian. Yeah, as I mentioned, the pronunciation also matches to put in order and increase, matches those. Phonetically, there's also a match to the Egyptian, not only in the meaning, which we just discussed, but phonetically, there's Egyptian word, the TS, which means to order, and K, which that's the little curly six word, in the Maya, means another. And so you're seeing kind of two things. You're seeing the glyph form seems to have been borrowed in, to some extent, into the Maya, and you also see a bit of the phonetics, some portion of the phonetics being borrowed in, which, interestingly enough, Stubbs noticed not the glyph forms or anything, but Brian noticed that this particular word in Egyptian, correlated into the Judeo-Aztecan. So it's actually, it's pretty sure it was incorporated into the Nephite language. And then, I mean, I would suggest it was borrowed into the Maya just because they're adjacent, and maybe when the calendrical system was being developed by the Maya, there was a corresponding, adjacent system the Nephites were running that had, these glyph forms, which they then incorporated. Also up in Teotihuacan, you do find the same glyph forms, although they really haven't been able to translate very well the Teotihuacan glyphs. We don't have a lot of text, and they look to be something different in terms of maybe monodic, meaning they kind of aren't necessarily structured language like we think. They may be more of triggers for a particular story or something like that. But again, even in Teotihuacan, they've been able to figure out, they do actually correlate with calendrical things like the new fire ceremony. It's a symbol of the 52-year cycle. So maybe it's also, whether they borrow from the Maya or whether they're actually borrowing from the Nephites, I don't know. They could have, because at least under the kind of the more accepted Book of Mormon geographical models in Mesoamerica, you have the Nephites positioned between the Maya and the Teotihuacanos to the north. So you have the Maya to the south, essentially, and the Teotihuacanos to the north. So then we get to the posterior date indicator. As I mentioned, it places the numbers going forward in time. These are the ones from the characters documents. These are the different examples. Then I've also just done the mirror. So when you're looking at, and also in the Maya, I didn't really point that out, but if you notice, sometimes they put it to one side, put it upside down. I mean, they do a lot of funky things with their glyphs. They're very artistic. So when you're reading Maya, you have to understand that, well, you're looking at a glyph, but they may orient different, the glyphs that form the large, they may put different smaller glyphs to form a large glyph, but it's not always in exactly the same order as from place to place. So this part of the glyph form matches the PDI. This section over here, these are all just different examples. Like this one, if you look, it's like on top and it's flipped on top. Same over here. Typically they are on the left side of the Maya glyph, but not always. And some of them, they've kind of modified them. So, and this is through time, right? I mean, the Maya glyphs we have from 350 AD all the way up, thousands of years. So some of these forms have changed themselves over time. So, like I said, they would move their affixes around, meaning they may have a word that has different syllables in it. They kind of move the syllables around stylistically. And basically the pronunciation is just I, which is an E of that particular of the affix glyph, which is the PDI glyph, both in the Maya and in the Reformed Egyptian. So then looking at that glyph, the full PDI glyph is IUT, meaning and then it came to pass and then forward. So it's not, it's got more than the Reformed Egyptian glyph in there. The Reformed Egyptian glyph is included as the affix I. So it's not like a straight word incorporation. They've incorporated the meaning into their glyph as well, into the Maya glyph. And then in the Egyptian, looking for that in the Reformed Egyptian source, you have this in hieratic. It's basically the hieratic of the Z11 glyph, and it forms the word IMY, which means which is in, or it can also mean follow after of time, old age. So it has time relationship to it. And it actually does have some correlation phonetically. As I mentioned, it has the word I, and you also see the I in the Maya glyph is what's found in the Egyptian. And Brian Stubbs noticed this too. Brian Stubbs didn't look at this incorporation into Maya or anything. This is all my work, but he was correlating that particular word in Hebrew or Egyptian, in this case Egyptian, is found in the Indo-Aztecan language family. So what I'm saying is it does show that that was there. That word was used in their language system. Probably it's some sort of form of Proto-Nahuatl. Nahuatl was the language spoken by the Nephites, at least at some point in time. And then, so whether it was borrowed early directly from some Egyptian that they had hieratic, or whether it was later coming out of kind of the modified language, whether it came out of Reformed Egyptian or this Nahuatl, Proto-Nahuatl or Proto-Aztecan. I don't know, but I'm just showing that the correlations are there. Again, it's kind of a long discussion here, but and scholars have recognized that actually when they've looked at the Maya, they have recognized now that they're saying there must have been some very early contact between the Maya language and the Uto-Aztecan. I mean, they obviously don't know about Reformed Egyptian and care about it, but they're saying, yeah, okay, there's some very early forms of Proto-Aztecan that are found in Maya, so there must have been some contact with that language earlier. And it's also supposed, or that and Brian maybe talked about this, that the Teotihuacanos probably spoke a form of Nahuatl. So, and as we know, a lot of the Nephites went north, and actually it's talked about that that it went to they had a very clear, they migrated very far away. It talks about it in Helaman up to the land of many lakes and that, and I think that's talking about Teotihuacan. So now the Teotihuacan was founded by Nephites only, but some of them were up there. So it wouldn't be surprising if they, in fact, had some of these forms too, which it shows that. Well, then the anterior date indicator, that's a series of crescents. There's also a funky one here, which I'll talk about. And generally places you're not counting your number back in time. So you'd say before, just like the Ronald Reagan says 4 years later, he got elected or something, it'd be 4 years before. So they would count back from that distance. And like the other character calendar glyphs, it's found incorporated and associated with the Maya as well. And these also, can be reversed, just like I mentioned on the other one. So when you're looking at the Maya glyphs, for example, you may see like a mirror reflection. Doesn't mean it's not different. And so here is that glyph. It's Yah is the pronunciation in the Maya. And so you can see that sometimes they would put it on the sides. Sometimes they had it surrounding. They actually had more than two on occasion. These down here are in the codexes, not in the monumental, meaning in the written books, few though they are. That's the form there. As you can see, they would kind of have them surrounding the glyphs on sides of the glyphs. Over here, you can see them on the bottom. They stylized them on the bottom. And that's actually the mulek, actually the fish. So that's a whole other discussion. But I mean, that's how they pronounce it in Maya is mulek. So again, you got the over here. Anyway, you can kind of see it's all over the place. And again, this is another came to pass. The Mayanists all recognize this as a came to pass. You can say it came to pass as since or past or then. I mean, there's different ways you can say it came to pass. So when looking at the source of this is a little bit trickier. Trying to figure out where did that come from originally in the Egyptian, from the Reformed Egyptian. Although I mean, I did figure it out, I think. And number one is because you didn't really find that particular glyph form, but you do see this word, the Egyptian exper or kefer. Again, my Egyptian pronunciation, I don't really speak Egyptian. I can just read the glyph. And means to happen, exist, to come into being, to change, occur, happen, or come to pass. So that's the monumental form, kind of the scarab beetle. This is a hieratic, so you can see the little C's. And of course, the Maya used to surround. And I didn't point out, sometimes there are little lines associated with them in Maya. So this does seem to be the source, both for the Reformed Egyptian and also in the Maya. And I think the fact that they would use 4 of them in the Maya may be indicative that they were borrowing it when this form of it, perhaps not just the little 2. The Reformed Egyptian had the 2 little crescents. There may have been 4 that were used at some point, but again, that's all just total speculation. And as I mentioned, it's Yah, and let's see, let's go. And there isn't I didn't really find let's see, so you don't really have, as I pointed out before, you have some phonetic correlation, meaning spoken with the other glyphs. This one, I didn't really find any, this did not correlate to Yah, these words in Egyptian. So then the snake variant, again, actually in Maya, they do have the ADI in this form, and it's a little snake that they put along the side, or the ADI, which actually matches the one version of the characters document that has this little snake ADI. Kind of interesting because it really, the main place it's found in Maya and among the Maya is in Palenque, and areas that are actually what we consider right adjacent to the Nephite area on the Usimacinta River and the environs there. So in the Maya, this particular one is pronounced Khan, can also mean the cardinal number 4, it means sky, but it also means snake, of course. And then another word in the Egyptian that, yeah, let's go back. So we have a Yah, we know for that one. And this has Khan. So phonetically, you don't have the actual, the Egyptian that has the same form, which is found in the hieratic. As you can see, all these kinds of snakes match the snake form. You don't have the phonetic exact connection directly, but you actually have an Egyptian form for snakes that is pronounced IMY. So it's actually, the snake does correlate with. Okay, then let's go to the period ending or completion glyphs. And there are 3 period endings in the Book of Mormon, is indicated by the clause making in the whole. You actually see that like in 3 different places. And I think what you're looking at there essentially is basically a glyph form or a period ending. They don't call it that in the text, but it's just recognized. That's how they translate it. And these are the points: end of the 7 tribes period, which I'm not really talking about. The 7 tribes period is found in the Characters document. It's not found in the Book of Mormon because it was in that section of the Book of Mormon that we don't have. So it looks to be the time period before Mosiah. And I mean, we can talk about it a little if you want. We have time to, I'm sure if we have time. And so the period ending glyph you have is kind of a crescent. And so you have a crescent, a line, and some dots sometimes, a crescent line and a dot. This is, again, the reign of the judges glyph form going from the reign of the kings, period ending of the reign of the king. So it's marking that period that's ending. The other one is coming in, so it's a transition glyph. And so you have the period of the reign of the judges ending, and then this is actually, which kind of is a towards the Most High, which is actually talked about in the Characters document. It's kind of reflecting Christ, and that's the coming of Christ calendar. So this glyph section in the Characters document is talking about the transition going from one calendar to the other. And then actually, so after this is implemented, then all the dates are in that form and have that ISIG, as I talked about, that introductory glyph. So each of the dates are, corresponding. After that, they use this. And then looking at in the Maya, again, so these are the period ending glyphs in the Maya. So with the U is the phonetic, is the name, is the word. As you can see, they have some dots. They have that form, kind of the curved form. Some have lines. So they do use the lines as well, along with the dot forms. And in the Maya, this period ending, meaning it has the date function as a period ending, but it also has another meaning as he, she, or it, hers, and has this pronunciation of you. The corresponding Egyptian glyph, interestingly, this, meaning it's been changed a little bit. It's curved in the lines and the dots, but that also means she, her, it in the Egyptian. So, let's see. Again, this is another one Brian Stubbs found had correlations between Egyptian, Uto-Aztecan. So consistent. I think Brian's study is kind of proof that these actually were existent and were likely to be borrowed. So that kind of summarizes my presentation. Let's see. Yeah, one we kind of skipped. I'll go to it because I think we have enough time. Is I didn't really talk about the 7 tribes glyph, but you have the 7 there. This is a glyph for tribe in the Egyptian. It's fairly well known. It means file or troop or tribe. And then, okay, and talked about the period ending glyph. So these are the 7 tribes: the Nephites, Jacobites, Josephites, Zoramites, Lamanites, Lemuelites, and Ishmaelites. So now they didn't always distinguish that. Jacob says, well, I'm just going to call them all Lamanites or Nephites, but you'll find them elsewhere in the Book of Mormon. So they were existing. So then kind of discuss, whether Mosiah had Lamanites with him when he fled. Seems like he probably did. Again, it was anybody that would follow him, because not very long after that, he had Lamanite problems. So King Benjamin did. So even though they fled far away, he still is. I had time to kind of discuss that. Again, that's a new It's not found in our Book of Mormon because it would have been during the time period, the 116 lost periods. Okay, that kind of leave this up in case there's questions.
All right, Jerry, you mentioned something about Mulek and the fish, and I'd like for you to clarify that when I missed something in there, I think. But what was it you were saying about Mulek and the fish?
Well, like I said, in my book, there's a whole section on Mulek and its correlation. It's also in the Swords of Shul book. It's likely correlation into depicted in Leventa. Essentially you have the glyph form in the characters document for Mulek. Don't have it handy in the PowerPoint. I don't really have it, but it basically the leading glyph, which means administrator or kind of like vassal king in the Egyptian, how it is shown in the Egyptian is a fish with legs on it. And you also have in the Maya, you have Mulek, which is a day name. One of the day names that David Kelly identified probably has a Hebrew derivation because it's actually in the same order. And it's depicted by a fish as well. That was what I was pointing out. In the Maya, you have that little fish, which is the mu. So, and also designates that day name. So it seems to be another correlation with Mulek, which might be expected since he was, there early. Anyway, so it's, and also in Leventa, in the stele, you have, what they think is Mulek meeting the Olmec looking kind of chubby, I don't know what you want to call it. You're familiar with the Olmec form. But if you notice, he has a huge headdress on that's a form of a fish.
Yes.
Yeah, so you kind of have, what I'm saying is you do have these, I'm not calling them parallels, or more than parallels. You just have these correlations that seem to be, show some linkage between the name Mulek, fish. In the Egyptian, it's depicted as a fish on walking fish, and the fish is on top, kind of like the headdress even. And then, so there's correlation between the Reformed Egyptian version of the title that Mulek had in the Reformed Egyptian, the depiction of him at Leventa, and then the fish form also in the Hebrew day name that looks to be incorporated, or the Hebrew that is incorporated into the Maya day name as fish, and also phonetically there's the mu or Mulak. So I'm just saying there's obviously some sharing and loaning going on here of that name and depiction, So I don't know exactly, like I say, some of these, they're so ancient, we don't have the languages, we don't really know. Seems to be obvious that they're not happenstance, right? There's just too many links. Phonetic, also representative, and also in different Reformed Egyptians.
But one of those remarkable links is one you mentioned about Heh, H-E-H, the god of eternity for the Egyptians, and endlessness. Wow. I had bypassed that one in my own study and thinking, and what a remarkable representation. Here I'm talking about trying to get a series of presentations on the mysteries of God, and clearly one of them is to try to understand the God of eternity, the God of endlessness. We can sort of cope with Alpha and Omega, but reaching beyond that is difficult for us. Yet here the Egyptians apparently were reaching beyond that.
I would mention, what I've shown you here is actually the most complex part of the characters document, meaning in terms of trying to correlate the glyphs. Most of the rest, which we haven't talked about, is actually fairly straightforward, text. The hieratic means the particular word, and then even like the name Benjamin, you can find it. Mulek, you can find the meaning, like it means little king. In the hieratic, it shows little king. So I guess what I'm saying is, if you go to the character, you're not going to have to plow through all this type of thing if you're going through the translation book. But it is the most clear Mesoamerican link. Let me put it that way. Meaning, showing that in fact the numbers have some Mesoamerican elements. The calendrical markers are definitely correlating to Mesoamerica. You know, again, I'm not like taking on Heartlanders or anything, but it seems fairly obvious where the Book of Mormon took place. The characters document is kind of a slam dunk in there.
And I understand you to be suggesting the Egyptian scarab is also an expression of that it can pass?
Yeah, meaning that was a word in the Egyptian. So if you go to, let's see. Yeah, so that would be the meaning they kind of should have explained maybe, but basically what I've tried to do is I try to show this is the monumental Egyptian, which is what's found on the temples and all of that. That's where you have like the complete depictions of the birds and the insects and the animals, among other things, you know, buildings. The hieratic is where they just shorthanded it. So that word, that glyph in the Egyptian does mean to happen, to exist, to occur, to come to pass. Right? And that's just the hieratic form of it. And that's what I'm saying. So you actually have the Egyptian meaning came to pass. So they just kind of, at least in the Maya, you can see where there are elements of it. Now they rearrange it, they put it around the outsides of their glyphs as an affix. Does that make sense what I'm saying? And so it's not necessarily that they're incorporating just one-to-one, they're incorporating it, and I've changed it a little bit, which actually would be expected if it was borrowed early on. So.
Okay, you use the term epi-Olmec, and I suspect that's a term that people would not be acquainted with. So some explanation there would be in order.
Yeah, basically you have what we call the Jaredite, right? The Olmec. You have the Olmec civilization, which, you know, at least the earliest city, San Lorenzo, there's some debate formulating around 1800 BC to maybe 1600, 1500 BC. Then it ends in 400 BC, basically as a culture, right? The Olmec falls apart. It corresponds with the Jaredites very well. But there was a culture that existed in Tres Zapotes up in the northern portion of what you call, not the very north of the Olmec, because the Olmec had influence way clear up into Mexico City even, but the kind of where you actually have, it's the northernmost city where you have these colossal heads and seem to be a center of some sort. Then the archaeologists have noticed that it changed. The culture, the Olmec culture is not there, but it has some elements of the Olmec culture. And so they call it the Epi-Olmec. And I actually, in my book, Swords of Shul, it talks about, if you read closely, the Limhite expedition, Limhi actually said, oh, these 24 plates, he says, we were thinking that maybe a record of this destroyed people or of the remnant of those people. So actually, I do think they got, and it says from which we got the record. So I do think the Epi-Olmec probably had the 24 plates and maybe, you know, the Swords of Shul, they're kind of their sacred bundle, and somehow it was given to the Limhi expedition. I don't know. Ether left it with them, or maybe it was passed down from, maybe he had some posterity, we don't know. But so, and it's interesting too, because if you look at the Nephi, if you're following kind of the Grijalva Poseidon model, kind of the Sorensen model, as they move into the land northward, that's when you start having the Gadiantans, and you have this ancient, you remember it talks about the record they got, and they're practicing the ancient practices, which it seems consistent with that the Epi-Olmec had some. They have the jaguar shaman, sculpture forms there of people transitioning into jaguars as part of their secret society, and the Nahualistan Jaguar secret society. So it does I think the Epi Olmec kind of does correlate with the Book of Mormon record. What you're seeing, they encountered the Epi Olmec as they started settling up in the land northward, and that's where you start seeing maybe some of these influences coming in. And clearly that's when the Gadianton started. You have Teotihuacan further to the north. So it seems like that's when they were starting to encounter these northern influences, which ended up, being the source of the destruction. I mean, the Lamanites are also helpful, destroying the Nephites.
Okay.
So I don't know. Is that what you're asking for, Paul? Something? Is that?
And you mentioned, okay, that helps to clarify then that we're talking about a multiplicity of calendars, that the Olmec would have had an earlier one, Epi Olmec, a little bit.
Well, the Epi Olmec had the long count, which the Maya had.
Right.
I don't know that we don't really see the long count in the Olmec yet. I mean, they don't have enough. There is indication, I think, of early date in 600 BC, like in Huiquilco, of the calendar round, meaning the 270-day year. So they did have a year count, but it was probably not the long count. So they had a calendar. When the long count got instituted again, that's kind of what I'm pointing out. Is looks like they have the Olmec. It seems like they maybe were even using Egyptian glyph forms in their introductory glyph to the long count, right? It has like the three curly. I mean, I'm just saying there, and my book goes into more detail there as to what I think some of the correlations. So it seems like maybe they were the ones that maybe got the long count going, incorporating some Egyptian. Again, it's
To me, that's
we don't have enough data to show anything, as from archaeological standpoint.
Yeah. Your assertion that the first dynasty of Egypt might be the marker for the 3,113 or 14 BC. That's a fascinating possibility, and then to suggest then that the Egyptians influenced the Jaredites, whose calendar then influenced the Epi Olmec and the Maya and the Zapotec and the Mixtec and so on. That it's just a fascinating scenario that you're laying out, and I just really quite
Yeah, if you go to my book, I actually take the Epi Olmec ISIG and I show what are likely Egyptian elements, glyph forms in that. I break it out. You have the basal form that actually matches some Egyptian, again, kind of correlating to the early dynasty. So again, unfortunately, we just don't have enough information, right? So I'm just saying that I can find, I mean, there are some correlations in the Egyptian into the Epi Olmec ISIG. I don't see, what we have of the Epi Olmec language or glyphs. I mean, although it's interesting, a lot of them have beards and all kinds of things like that, which you don't see in the Maya glyphs. But if you look at the Epi Olmec glyphs, there's facial forms that have beards and things like that. So and it may have been, I mean, I'm not saying it was necessarily the Mulekites or whatever or the people of Mulek that brought that over. There may have been Egyptian contact unrelated to Book of Mormon, right? We just don't know. And so some of these things may have been borrowed from trading, just trader contact.
Let me decide.
Paul. What was that, Paul?
Let the other hands go, please.
Yeah, we got several in line. We got Val and then Rick. Go ahead, please, Val.
Okay, so I'm wondering, in your work on the translation of the Characters document, you found a lot of correspondences in terms of the character meanings. To what extent have you derived syntactical rules? So language has its vocabularies, but it also typically has a set of rules about the order of words.
Yeah, and I part of the problem is I haven't looked at that in great detail. One of the things is it's not like I said, I think what we're looking at is a preface, right? So it's kind of an abbreviated, just a very short form. And one reason I didn't mention this last time, why those first lines I do think are separate, is because in the broadside document that came out in the New York newspaper, they don't have the second part. They only show the first part of the glyphs. So I think you actually have two scraps or something, and then both got copied into one. But the second part, again, it's just an event, a date, a hyphen space, and then it goes to the next one. So it's not a literary, it's not a paragraph, or it's not, it's more of like I said, it's a calendrical summary. I mean, it's not a narrative summary. It's just listing this event, this date. And so that's why from a grammatical standpoint, I don't think you can get too much off the second part. Off the first part, I think you can. I did actually talk a little bit that it does seem like you have the adjective following. It doesn't look like there's any prepositions at all, to be honest. So I do think in some ways, a lot of this may be context, right? Meaning if that glyph is in that position, but it's a very brief, snippet of the language. So I didn't really go further than just to say, it looks like it's abbreviated. I don't see what you'd call like prepositions really much. Even the year where you'd say so many years, I think it's just the calendrical marker indicates it's a year. There is a year glyph in there one place and a month glyph, but so some of it has to just be, you have to understand the context of the writing. And like I say, it doesn't, because what you've got is, it's basically, the preface is based on this distance number and going forward and backwards in count. And sometimes it counts back and then goes forward some. So it's really it itself is also a chronological element, meaning that whole paragraph is a chronologically structured, right? So again, it's not, I don't think what we're looking at is a literary, like Nephi's, Psalm, I mean, that would probably be structured differently. I think we're just looking at something that's an abbreviated sort of chronological, meaning the grammar may be more dictated by the chronological structure than it would be off of what the flow of the language.
Okay, so are you saying, I'm hearing two possibilities here. Well, one I know I'm hearing is that the chronology is really important in this section, and so chronological structure is apparent and dominant. Are you saying that there's not enough text to actually derive grammatical rules as part of the problem?
I think you might. It's such a brief section. It's hard to, with only that many lines of text. I mean, you could look at how I translated it, and you could say, well, okay, he obviously applied something, but honestly, when I first published it, it was like, I just want to find the meaning. That's actually how you translate anything, really, is of a different language. It's quite different structure. You just try to get the meaning, and then you kind of restructure it based on, in your language. That was what I was attempting to do. At the end, I said it'd be nice if somebody else would kind of take a look at this, but nobody else has. And I'll get back to looking at it. I'm just working on what I've done is I've actually taken the few certain elements of the characters document were kind of the primer that as a breakthrough to figuring out the entire Book of Norman chronology. That's my next book I'm working on. The fact that you had in the characters document, you have the destruction date in the Reign of Judges calendar. It shows it in the Reign of Judges calendar, not in the Coming of Christ calendar. So it actually gives me, it's the 125th year of the Reign of the Judges, the New Year's Day is the destruction. So then I can now correlate that with Coming of Christ calendar and back calculate. And anyway, so that's what I've been working on since this book is kind of the complex chronology. And then I gave a previous presentation on the solar eclipse. So then I, was trying to figure out, that tells me kind of the birth date of Christ. And I found the solar eclipse, it, came up in sunrise and eclipse in Mesoamerica, the exact same date as in the old world, where the people that had worked on the Magi projections of his astrological dates, was like April 16th, 6 BC. So what I'm saying is this book I'm working on will also verify is supporting of the translation of the characters document, but I haven't really gotten back to look at, you know, the linguistic elements. I'm still working on actually showing, yes, this is a valid translation. And
Okay, well, I will, you know, to have a real grasp on the language, you do have to have both the vocabulary and the syntax. And actually, Jim Lucas, I see is in line here. His point about Oliver struggling to translate and Joseph being able to do it better, that is one of the main things you would learn as you're doing translation, is you'd start grasping the syntactic rules of the translation, even if what you're seeing is a series of literal words, translations from the old Reformed Egyptian into English. If it was put in literal order, grasping the syntactical rules would have been one of the main challenges of translation. I think that's
definitely.
I think that's part of Jim's theory, and your point about languages like in Hebrew, if they're saying something is something, they just put the two words next to each other. They don't have the is form there, so you get this kind of thing all the time in language that you're talking about.
Yeah, like I say, I kind of just did a general, what I call just a, you know, swag, yes, saying, okay, here are some rules, I think, you know. One thing it was clear is in the Egyptian, they're using the shortest form for the word. So, I mean, I did look at it and say, okay, at least from word selection, which isn't really grammar, but it's still, you know, language, derivation of the language. And it seems to be that probably the media of the plates, meaning they need to have it compact, and that is dictating a lot of the language. Now, whether that would affect why there are no prepositions and things like that, I mean, I guess I could surmise that maybe I called it a stripped down kind of Egyptian, meaning I'm not seeing certain elements that maybe you might see in a normal like Egyptian text. And so there must be a lot of context. And I think that's why they were saying it's kind of hard for them to actually communicate everything they want in the written form. Probably it was also like oral, meaning, you know, that glyph maybe, you know, could have precipitated an entire story. I don't know. I'm not saying that's the case here, but maybe, you know, they struggle a bit with trying to express themselves in this language, right? Oops, you're muted, Val.
Oh, I said I'm yielding to Rick and his question at this point.
Okay.
Okay, we got 4 folks yet. We know you're there. So Rick and then James. Go ahead, Rick.
All right. Well, thanks again, Jerry, for presenting to us. Fascinating to be able to decipher that language into something we understand. My first question is, I don't know if Val was getting to it. I was kind of hoping you'd answer it with one of his questions. But when you see a glyph, like if you could like maybe flip to a slide that has a glyph on it. Yeah, maybe the one. Yeah, that's good. Not there, but on the right side, the hieroglyphs. Yeah. So when you see those and you can maybe make some sense of them by their components, is there a particular way that you would put them together? Is there a right way and a wrong way? Or are they all thoughts?
No, those are in Maya, they're phonetic. So it's actually like Egyptian a bit in that they have some that are ideographic, meaning the glyph just means what it means. It doesn't have a phonetic element, but they also have syllables in the Maya. And so each of like I was pointing out, like that uti, whatever, the U in the Egyptian, or the I, excuse me, reflects the first affix of the word, but the Maya uses a bigger word, but it looks like one syllable in there is matching the Egyptian that they just incorporated somehow into their language. So,
so
Maya,
for instance, yeah, go ahead.
So the Maya did have, like, typically they had ba and ma, they had syllables that corresponded to a glyph. So
Yeah.
you could actually phonetically structure the word. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Although they did
Um,
have ideographic, even the numbers, like you'd have a number, and sometimes they just use like a monkey head to mean the number 5. And like I mentioned here, this glyph can also mean sky. So it's not, it's just kind of an ideographic meaning. Maya is actually pretty complex because they did both. And
Interesting, Sequoia developed a syllabary for the Cherokee language, and it was like that too, where it had the vowels paired with the consonants in one
Right.
syllable. But like, say for instance, take your cursor and go to the right, right, stop. Oh, back 1, back 3, back, keep going back, back 1 more. Okay, so would someone read that, the snake, and then the number, what, 13? Is that on its
yeah,
side? And then that little,
that's a
looks
day
like,
name.
and then the monkey face with the 3 legs, the curls that are kind of upside, the curls on the bottom, would you read that like phonetically, like syllables, like from the snake to the right?
Yeah, well, again, I'm not an expert in Maya. I think
Okay,
they generally, their glyph forms went up to down, down to up, and then right to
yeah,
left. And so
yeah,
they did actually have rhyme or reason to the glyph. But as you can see, I think there was a lot of flexibility.
okay,
I mean, sometimes they would just artistically put them, as long as they had all, like, let's say it was a word that had 3 syllables.
yeah,
And sometimes they would like to put it in a glyph inside another glyph.
okay.
So it's pretty complex, and there aren't that many people that actually read the Maya very well. So
Yeah, I was gonna ask about that. There was a guy named, what, Michael Coe?
yeah, he
That,
wasn't really that good at Maya reading. David Stewart's the one that's
yeah, okay, yeah, I forgot about him.
and actually this article, a lot of these glyphs came from his article on this ADI PDI. He was the one that determined these are come to pass glyphs. That was David Stewart.
Yeah, and then I heard it got changed to, and then it happened.
Yeah,
Because,
well, it can
yeah,
then mean, it can mean any of those things. Like
yeah,
I
yeah.
translate it as since, because it came to pass is a term that's in the Bible, right? And it's translated
Yeah.
that way.
Yeah,
But you could translate that, if you're translating the Hebrew, you could have done it a few different ways, right? So it
okay,
came to pass as just one of the translations.
all right. So the 7, referring to the 7 tribes, refers to all those ites that are listed, the Jacobites, Josephites.
Yeah, that's what I think. That's what I think. That's why
Yeah,
they called it this, you had the 7, the
7
reign of
tribes.
judges. Yeah, the reign of judges, also the calendrical indicator is a stylistic 7. So I do
Uh-huh.
think you had the judges also, they still kept the same tribal structure, but they each probably had a chief, a judge from each tribe, and then they selected a chief judge. We know there were more than one judge, right? It was a
Yeah,
family.
lower judges and higher judges.
Right. So
Okay. Well, my
and
next question,
maybe the tribe of Nephi was the head, that's who the chief judge passed from,
uh-huh.
I don't, yeah, I'm just total speculation, but it would make
Yeah,
sense.
well, you got to start somewhere. You said that you mentioned the name Benjamin, like King Benjamin.
Mhm.
In Hebrew, the name Benjamin means son of my right hand. Is there
Yeah,
any correlation to that? Because you said little king or something like that. It means,
that was from Ulick. Benjamin, it does. It's actually son of the right hand. And Mosiah has basically son of God in the characters document. So
okay,
like just what you're saying, that the meaning, that's the interesting thing is, I think I've solved whatever people think is, clearly this is derived from Egyptian, Hieratic Egyptian and Demotic. So I can show you, the translation works in that language. The numbers work. The other thing is, like, a lot of people were saying, well, it's probably Hebrew pronunciation using Egyptian phonetics. Well, that's not what's happening here.
uh-huh,
But what it is using is, it's taking, like, the name Benjamin, for example, it may not be pronounced. If you take the Egyptian, it's not pronounced, but the Egyptian meaning of the
yeah,
glyphs means the same as the Benjamin name. Does that
I
make
got
sense?
you. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Okay, the character Kaf, that was the hand that Paul had asked you about in that one glyph.
Yeah.
Um, I was wondering if that was an open hand, like this side of the hand or this side of the hand.
I think it's the palm. So you're looking at the
Yeah.
palm.
Okay, I don't know if you've ever seen this book. Get it in the window there.
Yeah, I know. Well, I don't have it. So
Okay, well, it goes back to the pictographic language and has the whole alphabet, but Kaf, it says an ancient form of this letter, and then it has oh, like the U shape with the marks in the middle of it. It says the open palm of the hand. The meanings of this letter are bent and curved from the shape of the palm, as well as to tame or subdue as one who has been bent to another's will. So I didn't know if that matched
Well-
anything in your cough.
well, and here's like I said, I didn't go into great discussion because it's actually a pretty long chapter. But what I
Yeah.
was going off of is there was a guy named Compton who has actually correlated the Egyptian phonetic, because there is phonetic in Egyptian, phonetic glyphs, right? Especially they would use it when, they had a foreign name, so they had to construct it. He's compared that with the meaning of those, like, or the depiction of those with the Maya day names. That's what I was trying to show. And a hand is one of those in the Egyptian, and also you see it in the Maya day name as the hand. So it's not necessarily what you're saying is kind of the meaning, but there's clearly some borrowing going. I mean, it looks like they use the Egyptian phonetic, maybe a list to construct their day name meanings. Now they pronounce them totally different from the Egyptian, what I'm saying is there was obviously not, they weren't borrowing them in as a phonetic and glyph form. They were just borrowing the meaning in, which is pretty typical in, they call it a calc. It's the same thing I've kind of pointed out that you have at the time of Mormon in the Maya kingdom, you have this king arising named Shikak, whose name in Maya means born of fire. You also have Aaron, the meaning of in Hebrew of Aaron is also conceived in flame. Now the pronunciation is totally different. They're not borrowing in it's not like they're taking pizza, like we borrow the word pizza in, but they're taking the meaning and putting it in their own language, meaning they're constructing. Does that make sense? And
Yeah.
so that's what I'm saying is happening here in the day names. It looks like, and some of them seem to have incorporated the Egyptian, the underlying meaning, but really nothing phonetically.
Yeah, so you have kind of a difficult task because you're trying to translate 3 different languages into one, or one into 3, by all the symbols and by all the borrowed meanings and borrowed characters.
Yeah, and that's that's when I approached it. It was like, again, the numbers, the Egyptian meaning of the characters document, it translates from the Egyptian into what you would expect. And it has Mesoamerican. Now, what that means in terms of the way it was spoken, I haven't really derived that out of the glyphs. There is some indication that there was some Hebrew following, and it's like some of the names like Benjamin. I've kind of deferred to Brian's work. That's one reason I paid to have it published, because I thought it was very valuable. It kind of shows that you have this language that has absorbed Egyptian pronunciation and Hebrew pronunciation. Of course, it's changed over time with sound shifts, as you would expect the languages to do. So again, that's why I said I wish someone would give me the plates for even like a few days. I could answer maybe some of these questions.
I'll send them right over.
Yeah, and that's part of the problem is I'm looking at very limited text, and a lot of it's a calendrical summary, so it's not really, you can't just, it's not like laying out a nice paragraph has all the word forms and again, but again, I do think it's a major breakthrough.
Okay, well, thanks for all your work, Jerry.
One last quick question. I know we got 2 people behind me here. But the work that you've done here, at least on the Egyptian side, pointing out all the hieratic characters or comparisons with that little short characters document, which I agree is a very short piece of evidence to work from. To what extent does that course, I mean, Nibley and Sperry were talking about Hebrew and Egyptian equivalents. They weren't looking at the characters document, but they were talking about Egyptian and Hebrew parallelisms in the Book of Mormon, a long time ago. And these are big questions, maybe you just want to pass them off for this session, but one, I mean, do you think their work in these areas was valid and useful? And secondly, I mean, do you see yourself as much or more in that tradition where you're looking at linguistic evidence as opposed to sort of geological and geographic people like Sorensen?
Well, I look at it. Well, as far as Sperry, I mean, there was actually, and I talk about this in my book. There was an attempt at the characters document back in the 50s. There were some improvement era articles on it, but it was done by. You wouldn't have asked me, I can tell you. But he had gone through and was trying to show that there was some Egyptian, but he said, well. And he said, oh, there's numbers in here. But he said, because Sperry was pushing that, again, like I was saying, it was just Hebrew written in Egyptian phonetics. He didn't really try to translate it, because he was like, well, until we figure that out, it's obviously we have to figure out all the phonetics of all these glyphs, and then we can see whether it matches a Hebrew word, So again, yeah, they had some thinking on it. I don't think that they were on the right path. Neither of them talked about the characters document. Paul, as you mentioned, there's no publication. I think there's somebody commented that Nibley said, well, what if we look at it and it ends up being a shopping list, Egyptian shopping list or something? Meaning I think they were kind of like getting fried on the Book of Abraham, push back. And so nobody just wanted to take on, I suppose. And honestly, the provenance, I mean, they were like, well, we're not sure if it's Book of Mormon characters or not. But I would say the other correlation I have done is there are 4 glyphs outside of the characters document that Oliver Cowdery, it's in Oliver Cowdery's handwriting, and Frederick G. Williams probably copied that from Oliver Cowdery, and those translated straight from hieratic as well. The Book of Mormon and Interpreters of Languages, and those are not found. Interpreters of Languages isn't found in the Book of Mormon either, so it was probably somewhere on the front plate or something. But those so I can show exactly the same thing. Those came from Demotic or hieratic. There's another set of characters I'm also working on. It's called the Frederick G. Williams set of characters. I don't know if you're familiar with it, but it's different lines, and there is some, doesn't look like there's any numbers in there, but interestingly enough, like the bottom 2 rows were copied, but they were copied upside down. You can see the upside, their glyph forms, they're above it. So I don't even think they had realized they were copying. They were obviously copying it from something, not even realizing that.
That had it turned upside down.
Yeah, and it was probably like the seal is what I'm thinking. They were just copying it off. But I haven't, again, that's another book I just haven't had a chance to work on. What I do, I just start with scientific things. I do, if the Swords of Shul, if you look at it, I kind of do pollen analysis showing the land northward, where it is indicated, south of Veracruz was devoid of trees. The pollen counts went down. It has all this agricultural pollen in the exact time frame. I discuss actually the forensic bone degradation, what you would expect, because the dry bone. I mean, I look at a lot of scientific stuff as I'm going through. Of course, I correlate with the archaeology. I just take on different things that nobody's really looked at, like the geology of the Book of Mormon, just a general discussion. I says, well, I think I can figure out which volcano it is. We just need to get down there. I see things of time and see the varying eruptions were. The Nehor, Order of Nehor in Mesoamerica, again, that's a comparison of the Maya religion versus the Nehor and all the correlations that go on there. And so I kind of take on different things. Some of it's just because I have a question. Sometimes I listen to anti-Mormons and see what, you know, attacks they have. That's where I came up with probably the small plates look to be a Reformed Egyptian translation. That answers a lot of the questions. So sometimes my research is driven by some question that's nagging me. Like one thing that like on the Sumerian, right? It's like nobody's figured out Jaredite names at all. Obviously, they're missing something. They're looking for Jaredite names in the old world. They're not really finding them except for like single syllable ones. So I said something different's going on here. So I'm going to try to look at it differently and see if I can construct all these words out of Sumerian. I mean, it was clearly Sumerian. I looked at phonetics to all the phonetics in the Jaredite names match. There's nothing that wouldn't be consistent with the phonetics of Sumerian. So I kind of go through this process and I can show how all of them are derived from Sumerian etymology constructed in a Mesoamerican name structure fashion. So again, it was just, okay, here's a problem nobody's solved. I'm going to try looking at it from a lot of different angles, see what I can figure out. Characters document is no different. And so again, I've got the chronology. Again, that's the attack on the Book of Mormon. Chronology doesn't work, right? You have 600-year prophecy. You know, we know roughly when Lehi departed, 587 or something BC, or earliest 600. You have birth of Christ. We know it's before Herod died. I mean, I know what it is now because of my study, but at the time it was like 4 BC. We know it was Herod died 4 BC because there's a lunar eclipse, right? And so that didn't work. You didn't have 600 years. So, and the 400-year prophecies didn't work either. So that's where I started working on. I go, something's not figured out here in the Book of Mormon. It's obviously, they were very careful in all their year counts, right? I mean, time is a big thing to them. They're not going to like, oh, count 600 years and then we're within 5 years of it or something. You know? And so I figured that out too. So I mean, again, I just kind of work on. You ask what do I work on? I just kind of work on what I think is interesting, and then try to solve problems that are kind of these nagging problems